And the rig count has remained steady, although very, very low. 11 rigs operating today. Operators are telling us that the drilling that they're doing is one of three reasons. The first two reasons are federal permits or federal rights-of-way. Those a lot of times have timing limitations on them, and there is a great deal of discomfort and uncertainty with the potential November election. So if people have a federal permit or a federal right-of-way in hand, they're acting on it, even if it is expensive to do at this point in time. And then secondly, the major producers, the top 5, 6, 7, 8 producers, are all trying to make sure that their drilling departments and their land departments remain active, although at a much reduced level through the pandemic, so that when prices recover, they actually have people who are regularly processing permits and leases and rights of way and things like that, and can move pretty quickly to bring rigs back. But again, that's not expected until late next year at best. So what drilling we are seeing is largely being driven by uncertainty over this November's election and the need to act on federal approvals. A little surprised that the waiting on completion number actually dropped. And so it's interesting that as the completion crew numbers have dropped from 25 down to 1, back up to 3, now hovering at 1 to 3, maybe two crews out there. These remaining crews are really, really efficient. And so 1 or 2 crews are pretty easily keeping up with 11 drilling rigs. And when we were at our peak, when we had 55 rigs running, and it took 25 or so frac crews to keep up with them. There were a lot more moves and transportation of water and sand and all of that involved. So highly efficient at this point, and 1 or 2 crews seem to be able to keep up with 11 drilling rigs. Inactive well count dropped to 4,200, still the second highest number we've ever seen in the state. And so, but we're expecting as we move into July and August, that number is going to drop probably very significantly again, maybe back into the more normal range. So we think at these prices, much of the shut-in and curtailed production is coming back online. When we look at the producing well count, not up really all that significantly, 355 wells put back on. Interesting as we look at Fort Berthold, so the rigs and the activity has retracted to the core of the core, as we call it. And so a third of the drilling rigs, more than a third, are operating on Fort Berthold. Fort Berthold daily production went up 38,000. So virtually 120%, 130% of the production increase actually occurred on Fort Berthold. And the on trust lands, trust land production went up 40,000 barrels a day. So that's where the focus has been. And again, that matches up with what we're hearing from the operators that, you know, if there's any place on earth where federal rights of way and federal permits are critical and timing is critical, it's there. And that's where the bulk of the work is going on. So our current cumulative count for unemployment in the oil and gas service sector, around 10,700 layoffs. I want to talk a little bit about the Bakken Restart Task Force and the work that's going on there. So we finally got to putting people to work this week. We have 14 workover rigs plugging wells today, and we're hopeful that by this time next week we'll be up to 20. We think we got 400 people that we put back to work, and we think we'll be 600 plus at the end of next week. And so they are really busy doing that. We're opening bids today for the reclamation work to follow that. And so by the end of the week of next week, or certainly the following week, we should be able to put reclamation crews in the field following the pluggings and reclaiming the roads and the sites. So we're excited about that work. The oil industry, the service industry is very excited about that work. Finally, let's talk a little bit about flaring and gas capture. So we got to 90% statewide Bakken, 89% statewide overall, almost 90%, but not quite there. Off Fort Berthold, 92%. So outside the reservation boundaries, we're actually, operators are in full compliance with the upcoming November 1 requirement of 91%. However, on Fort Berthold, we're still lagging. We're at 85% on the trust lands. Again, a significant amount of that may actually be all the new, the new completion work and new wells actually being put on and production increases, because that's where we saw all the production increases. We're very hopeful that we can catch up there and that we'll be at the 91%. The other piece of good news there is that we haven't had any projects canceled, but we had a significant number of projects delayed into next year or postponed in the gas gathering, gas capture side of things. So some good news in the gas processing and in the Bakken Restart Task Force area, but in terms of production and wells and that sort of thing, June was just pretty much the same as May. So some questions that came in by email, we'll talk to them. Is production coming back online, and if so, when? So we're pretty sure that a significant amount of production came back online in July, probably in the 150 to 200,000 barrel a day range, and another 200 to 300,000 barrels a day this month in August. So those July and August numbers should look a lot better than May and June. Drilling is not picking up. In fact, drilling is going the other direction. Like I said, it's just people trying to take care of federal approvals that they have in hand. There's even some indication that we could drop into the single digits as winter comes along. So no, drilling activity hasn't picked up. Got a question about the November election and potential for an administration coming in that says no new drilling permits on federal lands. You don't have to look much further than in our director's report that 240 roughly of our 1,950 permits are on federal lands on Fort Berthold. And there would be probably another 100 or so that are on federal lands in McKenzie County, Billings County, outside of Fort Berthold. So in the neighborhood of 25% of our drilling permits for future activity late next year and into 2022 are the kind of permits that are being talked about being immediately canceled. So it would be a significant negative impact in terms of production, sustaining and growing production in North Dakota. So hard to put a number on it, but it's 20 to 25%. So it's very substantial. We're talking hundreds of thousands of barrels a day.
Any questions in the room?
Just to follow up on that, is there documentation anywhere about a candidate or candidates who have said they are going to stop with the permitting?
It's my understanding, and I believe I've actually seen it. I can't cite the source, so I got to be a little careful there. I think I've actually seen where Vice President Biden has stated that his plan would be to cancel all drilling permits on federal lands. Now, I sort of lumped federal and tribal lands together there, and that's a little more problematic because they are sovereign nations, and you can't totally lump them together, except for the fact that BLM issues all those permits. So it doesn't matter if it's a federal permit or a tribal permit, BLM issues it, and BLM works for the president. So maybe we can have Katie try to surface that source. I'm pretty sure I've read that, but I don't want to say for absolute certain.
I've got one question that come in. Is there anything new or an update on projections for state revenues that has come out that we have to provide?
So I listened in yesterday when Joe Morissette gave the revenue status and forecast for state government. I think the great news is that we're still above forecast even through the month of July. The really enormous pleasant surprise is sales taxes. Sales taxes have really come through strong this year. As people apparently didn't travel, they bought stuff. And so sales taxes have kept North Dakota revenues above water. We are going to see a big dip in terms of production tax and extraction tax revenues for May and June. And then we should see relatively healthy revenues for July forward. Now, those revenues are based on 1.44 million barrels a day and $48.50 oil. So we're going to be below that, but nothing like what the May and June numbers are going to be like, which is an enormous hole. Overall, though, what does that sort of mean? Buckets are not going to fill. There are water resource projects that won't get funded, and there are infrastructure projects that won't get funded. So I think the general fund will be okay. I think the SIF fund will be okay, but unlikely that the Prairie Dog bucket or the water resources buckets are going to get filled to the extent that the revenue forecast said. So to some extent, kudos to the legislature. They tend to put this money in buckets and spend it after it has come in. They don't commit it up front in real time. And as we have learned the hard way in 1986 and 1999 and 2008 and 2015 and now 2020, that's the right way to deal with natural resource money.
So it would be fair to say the legislature has a good bucket list. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
They've got a very long bucket list. Yes.
I have one kind of technical question. And so in simple terms, is there an explanation how production can continue to rise even if drilling doesn't continue? So how does that production number continue to go up?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because the production rise that we're seeing is the result of curtailing or shutting wells in and then, bringing them back on. So there's always what's called flush production when you do that. When you allow nature's pressure to catch up or get ahead of the production, then there's flush production there. But as Justin appropriately warned the Legislative Revenue Committee yesterday, unless drilling and completions pick up to that roughly 60, so double the June number, unless we can see close to twice as many completions as we saw in June, there will be a production rise and then natural decline will take over and production could turn around and begin to fall again. So we don't want to get people too excited when next month we sit down and say, whoa, production's up 300,000 barrels a day. That's temporary. And the following month, production's up 250,000 barrels a day. That's temporary. That's that flush production coming back from having restricted what we were doing. It's kind of like when you fall off the diet wagon. It doesn't last long term. And so unless we see completion numbers increase substantially, that's going to turn around and natural decline will take over. It can't, in order to move North Dakota production up, we probably need to have 70 to 80 completions a month, which is 2.5 times what we saw in the month of June. So it takes, what does it take, Justin? 50 to 60 to maintain production in that neighborhood?
Yeah, the 1.2.
Yeah, to maintain production at 1.2, 1.3, we got to have 50 to 60 completions a month. And to actually grow production, we got to push that to 70 to 80.
Questions as they come in. So with that sense, is it still expected that we'll get to 1 million barrels in July, or yet still this year we may see that?
Oh yeah, we're pretty confident that we topped 1 million barrels a day in July, and we'll actually see an increase over that amount in August, just based on the number of wells being put back on full-time production and the number of wells being put back on that were hard shut in. And Justin's got some numbers on those well counts. So yes, but again, I want to caution, unless prices improve and we start to see $45 North Dakota, $50 West Texas oil, and we see completion crews coming in, going after those 900 duck wells, then that's going to be a temporary rise, and it won't be sustainable.
Well, that I think that was a follow-up we were going to ask. Are there currently enough crews to do 70 wells a month?
Great question. So the question from the room was, do we have enough crews to do 70 a month? And no, we're not even close. Based on the drop in efficiency as we try to approach that number, we need 15 to 20 crews in order to accomplish that. And our best estimate is that there are 3 crews out there today. There are presently unemployed folks that could be put back to work doing that, but if it lingers too long, they're likely to go do something else. So that could create a real workforce issue as we try to get back to 15 to 20 frac crews. The equipment's there, it's parked, but we are not even close to enough crews at this point.
How long will the plugging projects continue to go throughout this, or have they started, and then how long will the program continue?
Okay, yes, they are started. So we started a week ago, and we were kind of hoping for a gradual ramp up, but because of the delay, people were so anxious to get to work that they just hit it with everything they had. And so we went from 0 rigs plugging wells to 14 virtually overnight. And so it's been a bit of a struggle to get everybody up to speed doing everything that they need to do, but we're getting there. Our intention is to continue that all the way through to hard freeze up, and maybe a little beyond if we can, which takes us to Halloween. And at that point, we're going to be asked by the Emergency Commission in the budget section to take a look at what we've done, what we've spent, and what remains to be done, and are there funds that need to be turned back and placed somewhere else, through the CARES Act. And so sometime in October, we're going to be asked to take a look and evaluate how much work remains to be done, and can we accomplish it by the December 30th deadline, and turn back any funds that we don't think we're going to be able to use, because there have always in every round been more requests than there were dollars. So that's the plan. I think it's a really smart plan. Let's go at it as hard as we can until we get to late October, and then let's take a step back and evaluate where we are and turn back any money that we don't think we can spend wisely by December 30th.
And when will the reclamation begin for some of those sites?
Okay, so reclamation should begin late next week. If not, it will start the following week. So we have some wells already that are plugged and they're ready. So we're opening bids today, and if physically possible, by the last half of next week, we'll have some reclamation crews in the field working. They're very anxious to get to work. Thank you for your time.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your patience. I'm Justin Krinkstead, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We're going to get right into it. I'm on slide 2, Katie. I'm going to probably move pretty quickly through some of these, just taking a look at oil production around the region. I was a bit surprised at Eastern Montana and South Dakota that their production levels in May held up as well as they did. I was expecting a bit of a stronger decrease in those neighboring states, just given the type of production and the age of the production. And even a kind of partial sneak preview at June production from Eastern Montana still showed it was relatively strong compared to what, in my mind, I was thinking would have been happening in that area. So I thought that was of interest here. But again, region-wide, below 1 million barrels per day as we enter and look at that May-June production levels. On slide 3, as Lynn already covered, the monthly shift in production, I'll touch on here in a moment, kind of adding some color to some of the points and topics that Lynn brought up during his portion. So on slide 4, the last several months now, I've been taking a look and trying to look at the data and say, what wells can we identify as being shut in during that particular month. And so for June, using a March as kind of the pre-collapse time frame and moving towards June, I identified just over 5,300 wells as shut in or severely curtailed, having a 75% reduction in their flow from March to that June time frame. So you can see those 5,300 plus wells accounting for just over 430,000 barrels of oil production per day. Of the wells that were hard shut in, showing 0 days on production in the month of June, that was roughly 300,000 barrels of that 436,000. So a large portion of the curtailments were hard shut in. There were wells that reported 0 days on production in the month of June. And then on the blue segment on the right-hand side, what you're looking at are the wells that did not fit into the category of shut-in. Those were still online, but from March to June, they still had 130,000 per day plus drop in oil production. That is that base decline discussion that Lynn brought up, and we've been talking a lot more about because it's now becoming evident. We know it's always been part of the equation for the last decade plus as the Bakken Three Forks has gotten rolling. But it's never been as obvious to folks as it has been over the last couple months of what this base decline wants to do and pull production down as these wells age and as the reservoir matures and pressure is depleted. So on slide 5, just comparing the May shut-ins to the June shut-ins, you can see a drop in the overall numbers of wells in orange, 6,700 down to 5,300. And then the impact on production marginally down, 490,000 barrel per day in May, transitioned to 430,000 barrels per day in June. So, and again, that blue segment increasing from May to June as time goes by. That base decline never stops, never takes a day off. It is continually trying to pull production down. Slide 6 is again just an update for June of what wells were still shut in. Still, by and large, all the production coming from the Bakken Three Forks system, and largely from a volume impact and a number of wells coming from relatively new wells that have been drilled over the last 5 years or so. Slide 7, this was a discussion that Lynn had brought up about how many wells does it take and what type of curve do we expect in the near term and what potentially can we look forward to in the next 6 to 12 months, looking out at the first half of next year. And you'll see again that gray line from that vertical June forward. We've got that jump up in July, the jump up in August, and then once those curtailments are largely brought back online, now we're getting into that discussion of how many wells will be brought online in a given month, how active is the industry, and this is where the industry's completions will compete against that base decline to determine if that curve statewide is going to be decreasing, if it's going to hold steady, or if something changes in the industry, has a surge in activity, what would it take to grow production? So I think Lynn pointed out clearly 70 to 80 well completions is what it would take to hold production around that 1.3 million barrel per day range. And as he clearly described, we certainly don't have that number of completion crews in the region today. So again, I think this is just a handy visual for folks to understand what the curve might look like, that false positive that may come as production ramps up in July and August, and then that potential drop down again as we exit the 2020 timeframe. Slide 8, again, just for reference for folks that are curious what I'm building into my forecast for the number of well completions. Slide 9, now get into the more traditional discussion about oil transportation dynamics. We did see some shifting around of barrels in the month of June. As production dropped in May, there was substantial space that had opened up on almost every pipeline system exiting North Dakota, so there was a lot more flexibility for barrels in the region to pick and choose if they weren't committed to a certain transport option to reallocate barrels to a different pipeline system or to rail. So we'll see here in a second how that turned out. So on slide 10, you'll see that based upon recent history, we did see a drop in the percentage of utilization of crude by rail. So not only on a volume basis, but a market share basis, crude by rail lost some market share. And I'm always pointing out and discussing that Brent WTI spread that you see in the blue dotted line. If that's below that right-hand axis of $5 to $6, that does not favor crude by rail economics. And so certainly in the month of June, May, we're looking at $1 or $2 spread between Brent WTI. That was not enough to incentivize the use of crude by rail from the region. And that likely explains why we're seeing that drawdown in the utilization of it as space opens up on other pipelines, getting those barrels that have that flexibility onto those other transport options to maximize the value of that crude. Slide 11, just update on numbers, about 150,000 barrels per day is my estimate for June crude by rail from the region. Slide 12, no major shifts in where those barrels are going, still focused on the east and west coasts for the destination of the crude by rail from North Dakota. And slide 13, just a refresher on the pricing. No major shifts. Obviously, the market as a whole has been moving up and down, but PADD 1, PADD 5 continuing to have the highest priced refining markets. And again, those higher costs of crude by rail will continue to, again, day in and day out, look at these markets, see what type of options exist if they have that flexibility, and move accordingly. On slide 14, just a refresher of today's pricing dynamics. Brent WTI spread still less than $3 per barrel, so I don't expect a major shift in the near term of how North Dakota's barrels are being transported out of the region. Slide 15, we saw in May and even further in the month of June the decrease in the amount of crude traffic coming south through North Dakota from Canada. And so again, this is picking up truck volumes and rail volumes. Again, as the industry North America wide was collapsing and curtailing and shutting in production, really no surprise that we were seeing less Canadian crude coming into the state and transporting through, and as well as our exports north to get on Canadian pipelines or Canadian rail facilities also decreased in the month of June. On the flaring side, from a gas capture perspective, statewide, no change, 89%. But what we did see a noticeable shift was those pieces of the pie. We saw the amount of flaring from wells that did not have pipeline connections that shrunk. And so on slide 17, that's the historical. I'm just looking at the very baseline in blue there. 2% improvement in gas capture from wells that previously were not connected to gas sales. And I think that can be clearly seen on slide 18 each month when I'm looking at how many wells are connected to gas sales versus how many wells are producing gas for the first time. It's always encouraging when that black line and red line are either hand in hand, or if the black line is higher, that's a good move in that the industry is catching up on a backlog of wells that need well connections for gas sales. So as you can see in June, gas sale connections outpaced new producing wells, and we saw a decrease in the flaring percentages, a noticeable decrease from those wells that previously did not have a connection. So that is certainly good news. Oil price forecast in slide 19, again, just for reference for folks that like to follow what I'm building into my models. On the gas capture and processing front, again, in the near term, things look very good from a capacity standpoint. Long term, on slide 21, we're still working on the next set of solutions. What's the appropriate timing of those projects? What's the scope and the need, the location? So certainly the industry understands the current dynamics are not the long-term expectations, and folks still have their eye on the ball to keep moving with projects and continue that investment here in North Dakota. And then lastly, slide 22, just taking a look at our major projects and major infrastructure. I will note for folks that have been following the Northern Border tariff filing that occurred in May of this year. Last Thursday, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, held a technical conference for Northern Border and other interested parties to come together and present their sides of the issue, either for or against a hard, or not a hard, but a BTU limit of 1,100 at Glenolan South on that Teal Northern Border pipeline system. So that would certainly have a major impact on how North Dakota's gas plants operate, what has to happen with North Dakota's NGLs, and how those dynamics may shift if FERC approves ultimately that 1,100 limit at Glenolan. After the technical conference on Thursday, Northern Border was going to come back with a revised tariff. They were going to tweak some of the language, some of the terms. Late yesterday afternoon, that revised tariff was filed. It's available on FERC's website again if anyone is interested in it. It does change some of the timelines for the implementation of the 1,100. It scales it in a different format than originally proposed. So folks, again, will have a time period now to comment on those changes, and we will see likely by early November what FERC decides to do with that tariff change. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Can you explain why the 1,100 figure was put in?
Yeah. So
terms?
Yeah. So 1,100. So most pipeline systems from an interstate gas transmission perspective have some type of upper limit on their gas quality specs. Northern Border currently does not. Many of their downstream interconnecting pipelines have a limit of 1,100, and so their intention was to mirror some of their downstream interconnecting pipeline systems that gas gets pulled off of. They do have some interconnecting pipelines that have no limits, and so that was some of the discussion back and forth of how much North Dakota gas goes to systems that have limits, how much North Dakota gas goes to systems that don't have limits, and so and what are the costs associated with having to change and reconfigure North Dakota's plants in order to meet an 1,100 level, because today many of North Dakota's plants cannot meet 1,100. They would have to either pair up with an existing facility that does have those capabilities, or they would have to make investments, major investments in their infrastructure to add capabilities to get at 1,100 or below.
Do you know what the capacity right now is on Dakota Access? And then if they have any available capacity, if you can just quickly speak to that.
Yeah, so the capacity is still, they've not expanded that system, so it's still 570,000 barrels per day is the capacity on Dakota Access. All pipeline systems in the month of May and June had open capacity. I don't recall off the top of my mind what exactly, how much space was available on each individual system, but I can say with certainty that I'm not aware of any segments or pipelines that were full in the month of May or June.
Any additional questions?
I have one other one, and that has to do with the Enbridge Line 3.
Yep.
I will apologize if I'm way behind on this, but I haven't heard anything about it recently. What has happened?
That's a good question. With everything that's been happening with Dakota Access and over the last number of weeks, I'd have to get back to you on exactly what that timeline looks like today. So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.